He thought the worst thing I could do was cry, break down, scream, crumble, maybe beg him to explain everything like I was some pathetic wife who couldn't see the signs. But no, I didn't cry. I documented. While he was busy crafting lies and draining our bank accounts behind my back, I was compiling a record, not out of vengeance. Not even because I suspected it would come to this. I did it because it was tax season, because I'm methodical, because I pay attention when things don't add up, numbers, stories, people. He underestimated that. The day I laid it all out was a quiet one. No yelling, no dramatic music playing in the background. Just the cold hum of fluorescent lights, the soft click of a printed spreadsheet being placed on a kitchen table that I had paid for. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every suspicious purchase was laid out in black and white. Time-stamped, categorized, annotated. I'd color-coded the lies. I made it easy for even him to understand what he'd done. It was the first time I'd ever seen him speechless. And I didn't need a single word to tell the story. The numbers did it for me. The missing thousands. The unapproved transfers. The luxury hotel charges under our joint card while I was on my knees trying to resuscitate COVID patients. I watched nurses cry in storage closets, families say goodbye over FaceTime, and still, somehow, I held it together. Meanwhile, he was off in Miami, sipping cocktails and playing king. I didn't collapse when I found out. I didn't scream or throw things or key his car. I didn't even lose sleep. I just started collecting. Quietly. Meticulously. Like I've been trained to do. Like I do when someone's vitals start slipping, and I need to make sense of a deteriorating situation. Because that's what this was, a slow-motion code blue. Except this time, I didn't rush in to save it. This time, I stepped back and documented the decline. He never saw it coming. He mistook my exhaustion for ignorance. My long hours for disinterest. My silence for blind trust. But silence is never passive. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone sharpening their blade. And when the time came to use mine, I didn't raise my voice. I raised a file folder full of undeniable evidence. Copies of bank statements. Audio recordings. Screenshots. It was the kind of prep a forensic accountant would be proud of. Hell, I'd already had a quiet consultation with a divorce attorney 2 weeks earlier. She said it was the cleanest case she'd seen in years. He thought I was too busy saving lives to notice him gutting ours. What he didn't realize was that I see patterns in EKGs, in breathing, in blood pressure, and yes, even in financial betrayal. His pattern was clear. And the prognosis? Terminal. I didn't file for divorce out of rage. I did it out of clarity. Because once you see someone's true nature, not the version they pitch at dinner parties, but the one that comes out when they think you're too exhausted to care, you can't unsee it. You shouldn't unsee it. He thought the worst thing I could do was cry. But what I did instead was so much worse. I filed. And this time, he was the one who never recovered. The irony never escaped me. While I was triaging emergencies under fluorescent lights and the stench of hand sanitizer, my husband was living a second life behind the warm glow of our shared finances. I spent my days in chaos, organizing breathless people into prioritized levels of dying, and he was somewhere else entirely, organizing deceit into bank withdrawals and Venmo requests. The timeline was the first thing I noticed. In the early days of the pandemic, I chalked up his distance to stress. Everyone was unraveling in different ways, and he had always been the more reserved one. He'd say things like, "You're doing God's work," and send me videos of people applauding healthcare workers at 7 p.m. sharp. I thought he was proud, supportive. In truth, he was just buying time. While I was pulling double shifts in a department that looked more like a battlefield than a hospital, he began testing boundaries, small withdrawals here and there. A hotel in New Jersey. A new pair of designer sneakers I'd never seen on his feet. He used our joint account like it was some mythical ATM that dispensed denial instead of dollars. At first, the discrepancies seemed harmless. Maybe I was just too tired. Maybe I had missed something. That was the most dangerous lie, the one I almost told myself. But then came the month when rent bounced. I remember the exact patient I was tending to when I got the alert. Middle-aged man. Shortness of breath. COVID positive. He clutched my hand and told me he was scared, then apologized for being dramatic. His lungs were deteriorating by the minute. And while I was telling him he wasn't alone, while I was holding the line between life and death for someone else's father, my own life was quietly imploding via a notification on my phone. It wasn't just the rent. Our savings were shrinking like a balloon with a pinprick, slow enough to go unnoticed, but deadly if ignored. I scoured the statements during my few hours off, which were never restful. Sleep came in fits, and so did clarity. The puzzle pieces started shifting into place. Jewelry I hadn't bought. Meals I hadn't eaten. Flights I hadn't taken. I was married to a man I no longer recognized. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I began to treat my own marriage like a patient I couldn't trust. I gathered history. I examined behavior. I monitored the vital signs of our bank account, documenting the symptoms of betrayal. The deeper I looked, the sicker it got. He hadn't just taken money, he'd rerouted his life. Separate credit cards. Cryptic emails. A Venmo to a woman labeled only as L. Always vague enough to deny, but never innocent enough to dismiss. The audacity of it all nearly broke me. Not because of the betrayal, I could survive betrayal. I'd seen spouses collapse in hospital parking lots after watching their loved ones die on Zoom. I knew what actual tragedy looked like. No, what nearly broke me was the realization that this man had chosen to orchestrate his exit during the one time in our lives when the world had quite literally stopped. He had time. He had options. He had the luxury of boredom, of deciding he wanted something new. I had masks stapled to my face and bruises on my cheeks from goggles I wore for 16 hours a day. And still, I was the one showing up. He wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying every version of me that kept choosing him, every tired, overworked, still believing version. I remember watching him sleep one morning. I'd come home from a triple shift, one of the ones where you forget what day it is and hope your hands stop shaking long enough to drive home safely. He didn't even stir. Just breathed evenly, mouth open, as if peace was something he could afford. That was the moment I stopped being his wife. From that point on, I played the long game. I smiled. I nodded. I pretended, not out of fear, but out of strategy. I wanted the story to be airtight. I wanted the data to be untouchable. I wanted his face when I revealed the truth to be seared into my memory as the moment I took it all back, not with violence, not with chaos, but with proof. The ER had taught me how to function in madness, how to detach from pain long enough to make life-saving decisions. That same muscle helped me survive the slow burn sabotage of my marriage. I became colder, sharper, not cruel, but methodical. The woman who once cried at wedding vows became the woman who silently scanned receipts with forensic precision. He thought he was clever. He thought I was too tired to see what he was doing. What he didn't know is that exhaustion sharpens you in ways peace never could. It forces your instincts to evolve, your radar to heighten, your emotions to retreat into strategy. I documented everything, not out of spite, out of necessity. When I finally decided to file, I did so with a level of calm I didn't know I was capable of. And even then, I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I simply printed the reports, highlighted the betrayal, and stacked it all in a manila folder like a surgeon prepping for a procedure. Because that's all it was, really, a removal. A necessary excision. He'd infected the foundation of our life with deceit. But I'd found it early. I had the scans. I had the labs. And when the day came, I operated without hesitation. The double life he built? It collapsed under the weight of my truth. By the time I was ready to show my hand, I no longer felt like I was doing it for revenge. It wasn't about watching him squirm or crumble or admit what he had done. It was about closure, the surgical kind. Clean. Unapologetic. Necessary. I waited for a Sunday morning. The kind of slow, syrupy day where the world feels soft and half asleep. The sun stretched across our kitchen in lazy streaks. The coffee pot gurgled like it had a soul. He shuffled in, yawning, reaching for the mug he always used, the one I had bought during our honeymoon in Vancouver, with the tiny red canoe painted on the rim. He still used it like our life meant something. Like there was still substance under the surface. He didn't notice the envelope on the table right away. When he did, he squinted at it like it might bite. There was no name, no label, just weight. The weight of paper, evidence, and the final nail. He picked it up like it was junk mail, slid his thumb under the seal, oblivious to the fact that the moment he opened it, the world as he knew it would start bleeding out. I didn't watch his face. I watched his hands. People forget their hands when they're trying to hide their reactions. His twitched slightly when he hit the first highlighted line, a hotel bill he swore he never stayed in. Another line, another tick, a flight to Phoenix in the middle of March, when he had told me he was working late. The further he read, the stiller he became. I had captured it all, statements, timelines, side-by-side screenshots of account changes. He hadn't just been draining our money. He created a new reality for himself, one where I didn't exist. A digital world scrubbed of my presence, but funded by my labor. My exhaustion had paid for his escapism. That envelope held every receipt he thought would disappear, every lie he didn't think would leave a trail. But I was an ER nurse. I knew how to trace symptoms back to their origin. I knew how to isolate disease. I knew how to quarantine. He set the envelope down, stared ahead, not at me, not at the evidence, just forward, as if his brain had entered a blank hallway and refused to open any doors. Still, I said nothing. There was no need for words, no vindictive monologue, no dramatic ultimatum, because I had already left. Not physically, not yet, but spiritually, emotionally. That line had been crossed months ago, in the middle of a graveyard shift fever dream, when I realized I didn't want him to touch me again, not out of anger, but out of preservation. He felt like a toxin I could no longer afford to absorb. I stood and walked over to the sink, washed out my mug, wiped the counter. Normal things, Browning things. And he just sat there, still holding on to the silence like it was the last piece of dignity he had left. I wanted to ask, was it worth it? But I didn't. I knew the answer. It never is. Affairs, lies, secret lives, they always seem worth it when you believe you're smarter than the people you're betraying. When you confuse opportunity with freedom. When you mistake someone's silence for blindness. But I wasn't blind. I had been watching. Quietly. Carefully. Long enough to understand that what he wanted wasn't freedom, it was erasure. He wanted to keep the house, the shared history, the social appearance of marriage, while quietly extracting himself from the responsibility of it. But I was done carrying both of us. I had filed the divorce papers a week earlier. They were waiting in a lawyer's office downtown. My signature already drying like ink on a prescription pad. What came next wasn't up for discussion. I wasn't offering options. I was offering closure, and only because I had earned it. He finally spoke, one of those half-hearted attempts to twist a narrative, to reframe betrayal as confusion or loneliness. But I didn't absorb it. His voice was just another monitor flatlining in the background. Because at that moment, I realized something profound. You don't need closure from someone who doesn't know how to be honest. You give yourself closure. You write it in bold. You stack the evidence. You make the calls. You walk away, not with bitterness, but with clarity. And that was the gift he never saw coming, that I would rise from this not as a broken wife, but as a woman who had witnessed the worst of humanity and still knew how to heal. I left the envelope on the table. Didn't touch it. Didn't take it back. That was his burden now, the paper trail of his cowardice. The silent indictment of every selfish decision he'd made while the world outside was dying and I was trying to keep it alive. As I stepped outside, the air hit different. Not cleaner, not lighter, just real. Like breathing without a mask for the first time in months. I didn't look back. There was nothing back there worth remembering. Let him live with the silence. I had work to do. There's something eerie about silence after chaos. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums beneath your skin like a reminder that you've just walked out of a burning building and your lungs still haven't caught up. In the days that followed, he didn't call, didn't text, didn't beg. And maybe that was the worst part, or the best. Because if he had tried to explain himself, I might have had to listen, if only out of habit. But his silence was an answer. The kind that slammed shut like a vault. He knew what he'd done. And he knew I'd finally become the kind of woman who didn't negotiate with cowards. I moved into a small apartment above a bakery. It smelled like cinnamon in the mornings and yeast in the afternoons, and sometimes, if I left the window cracked, the scent would lull me to sleep like some kind of humble spell. It wasn't glamorous, but it was clean, quiet, mine. I changed everything, passwords, accounts, the route I took to work, even my name on social media. Not because I was hiding, but because I was done being trackable, done being mapped like territory he thought he still owned. My lawyer called 3 weeks later. The audit had gone through. See, that little trick he'd never anticipated, me keeping every record for tax season, had turned into something far more powerful than a spreadsheet. It had become a shield, a weapon, a line of defense for when the financial investigator he never saw coming began digging. Turns out, siphoning money from joint accounts into secret solo ventures under your spouse's name during a pandemic doesn't sit well with the IRS. Or with divorce court. The man had been sloppy. He'd used my name on paperwork for some of his investments. And that, legally, dragged me into a mess I didn't create. But the paper trail I'd maintained, meticulously logged and cross-referenced, proved what mattered most. I had no knowledge of these transactions. I had no access to the returns. And every transfer had originated from his devices, his IP address, while I was clocked into a hospital saving lives. He tried to argue duress, stress, fatigue. Pandemic panic. But no one bought it. Not the judge. Not the mediator. Not even his own lawyer, who looked at me across the table with a flicker of something like admiration, or maybe just quiet warning. She came prepared. In the end, I walked away with the house, the retirement account, and full financial immunity. He was left with a penalty from the IRS, several frozen accounts, and a pending fraud investigation. He would likely dodge prison. But not debt. Not reputation damage. Not the slow erosion of credibility that clings to men who think they can rewrite reality while their wives are drowning in PPE and 24-hour shifts. And me? I didn't throw a party. Didn't dance or toast or scream into the night sky. Instead, I bought a cactus. A weird, spiky little thing from the corner plant shop. It sat on my windowsill like a badge of honor. Hard. Resilient. Unapologetic in its shape. Sometimes, healing doesn't look like softness. It looks like survival with teeth. My coworkers never knew. Not the full story. Just fragments. Whispers about the divorce, the new place, the sudden lightness in my eyes. One nurse called it post-trauma clarity. I called it rebirth. Eventually, I went back to school. Took a course in forensic accounting, of all things. I figured if I could dissect trauma in the human body, why not learn to dissect it in bank statements too? Knowledge became my armor. A way to never be fooled again, and maybe to help other women who'd been burned in the same quiet, calculated way. I started writing. Nothing grand. Just essays, private at first. Then blog posts. Then articles under a pseudonym. Stories about invisible betrayal. Financial abuse. The way love can be weaponized into something cold and capitalistic. The messages started trickling in. Then flooding. Women from all walks of life, nurses, teachers, tech execs, stay-at-home moms, all saying the same thing. I thought I was the only one. But none of us are alone. We just live in a world that teaches us to be ashamed of being tricked. That frames betrayal as weakness instead of proof that we have the capacity to trust, and that someone else weaponized that trust against us. It's been a year now. He's disappeared from my life in every meaningful way. I don't look him up. I don't follow the threads. I built something better in the space he used to occupy. Not with new love. Not yet. But with truth. With safety. With a sharp, self-forged kind of peace. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I can still smell the bakery downstairs mixing the dough for morning pastries. It smells like beginning. Like something rising. And sometimes, I sit by the window with a glass of wine, watching the streetlight flicker on below, and I think about the woman I used to be, tired, stretched thin, working double shifts while her husband built an escape hatch from their shared life. I think about her silence, her patience, her invisible calculations, and I whisper to her across time. You were never naive. You were never weak. You were just waiting for the right moment to become unstoppable.